My name is Sophie Hare. I am a second year in the college, majoring in public policy and minoring in Spanish, and I currently work as an IOP Speaker Series intern. It is my honor to introduce our guests this afternoon, former Congressman Justin Amash and former Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick. Representative Amash represented Michigan's 3rd District in the U.S. House of Representatives from January 2011 to January 2021. Though first elected as a Republican, Representative Amash left his party and the House Freedom Caucus in July 2019 and went on to become the highest-ranking Libertarian Party office holder in the country. Prior to his congressional service, Representative Amash served one term as a state legislator in the Michigan House of Representatives and as a business lawyer for a Michigan law firm. This quarter, Representative Amash is a Pritzker Fellow. Governor Deval, who is originally actually from the south side of Chicago, served as the first African-American governor of Massachusetts from 2007 to 2015. Governor Deval also served from 1994 to 1997 as the United States Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division under President Bill Clinton, and was a Democratic candidate for President of the United States in the 2020 U.S. presidential election. He is currently the chair of Together Fund, a political action committee that supports progressive politics and grassroots groups to drive turnout and engagement among marginalized voters. Governor Deval serves on the IOP's Board of Advisors. Today, Congressman Amash and Governor Patrick will examine and discuss the meaning of a word that is ever present in our political discourse: freedom, a word that is used in divergent ways by myriad political factions to further their cause. In a time of deepening political polarization and pervasive division, this conversation couldn't be more opportune. And during the program, we encourage you to raise your virtual hand, share what freedom means to you, or ask a question. Thanks again for tuning in, and please join me in giving a warm welcome to our guests.
That's great. Thank you, Sophie. Thanks, you, Congressman.
Thanks, Governor. Well, we'll call each other by first name, I guess.
Please. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, and let me thank you for your service as well. I appreciate that. And not just to the IOP, as important as that is, but to the people of Michigan and the Congress and in the State House.
Thanks. Same to you for your service.
Thank you. Thank you. So I had a question for you, if I may, to start off. My friend and classmate, college classmate, Grover Norquist, sat me down in the dining hall at Dunster House in our, I think, junior year and tried to explain libertarianism to me. And I remember my reaction to him was, God, that sounds terrific, but how does it work in real life? How do you think of yourself? How do you describe libertarianism to people?
I'd say it's fundamentally focused on the protection of rights. So it looks at society and says that we benefit when rights are protected, and we benefit when we have humility as human beings, when we recognize that we are fallible human beings, we are highly dependent on one another, and the only way to make use of all of the knowledge of society is to maximize freedom to the extent possible, so that people can make decisions based on plans and intentions that they have, rather than on the plans and intentions of someone who's very far away, who doesn't know them, who has some supposed claim to superior knowledge, which they don't actually have. So the idea is really about humility, understanding that human beings are limited in our capacity. We are highly dependent on others. We are highly social and cooperative creatures. And in order to maximize our ability to work together, we need to have a maximum amount of freedom to make use of all the knowledge that's dispersed throughout society. And really, to me, that's the fundamental aspect of libertarianism. It's about protecting rights because we are so limited in our capacities as individuals, and we need each other so that we can work together and progress as a civilization.
When you use the term humility, I wanted to ask you if you've ever actually met Grover. But
I have. Yeah.
When you talk about the when you talk about the inherently social nature of human beings, I'm reminded of the importance and the value of community that I learned growing up on the south side of Chicago. David Axelrod has heard me talk about this a million times, because that was a time when every child was under the jurisdiction of every adult on the block, right? It's as if we were taught that we belonged to each other, that we owed something to each other, and that was about encouraging each other's aspirations, and helping in the ways that we could each other reach our greatest potential. And in a lot of ways, that has influenced how I think about freedom. That in that same, if you will, that same social context that you described libertarianism, that is, that individuals do have a collaborative dependence or interdependence. And that, for me, practically speaking, to reach our greatest potential, we have to enable and encourage opportunity and equality and fair play. And I think that sometimes those rules in a country, not talking about just a community and social norms, but sometimes those rules do have to be made not by people who are smarter, and I'm certainly not talking about the folks who deem themselves as smarter, but people who are charged in our system of government for having responsibility for sorting out those rules. You'd agree with that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I believe in federalism. I believe there are different levels of government, from a federal government all the way down to governance within your family, for example.
Yeah. Right.
And they have different roles. And the question is not about whether there should be, for example, a federal government or not a federal government. I think all of that stuff is in some sense inevitable. We're going to form relations at higher and higher levels, going all the way to, even the world level, because we meet, for example, at the United Nations, and we have conversations. The issue is, at each level, what is the correct level of power for that level, and what should they be able to do in terms of having control over your life, and what are the kinds of things that they do at that level? Are they general rules of just conduct, or are they commands given from afar? Because there are differences. And so I don't object, and certainly libertarians that I'm familiar with don't object to the idea of rules at high levels of government, but those rules should follow certain parameters so that we don't undermine freedom and liberty.
Can you talk a little bit about your own journey into politics and public service?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to say, for the students who are in the room, if you have a question or a comment, please feel free to raise your hand at any time during this conversation, because we want to keep this casual and open. So I'm the son of immigrants. My dad is a refugee. He's a Palestinian refugee. My mom is a Syrian immigrant from Damascus. They both obviously came from environments that were not great when they came to from the countries they came from. And when they came to the United States, they had incredible opportunity in the sense of finding a place where they could seek out their own direction in life without being dependent on the government, or without having to have the right last name, or the right ethnicity, or the right religion. I mean, we're Orthodox Christian, so we didn't face the same difficulties that, say, some of our Muslim friends who have come from the Middle East have faced. But but they did have those challenges, and in this country, those challenges can be overcome. It doesn't mean that it works out for everyone, but it does mean that in this country, we've built a place together that, at least foundationally, at least in principle, is not looking to those superficial characteristics. It's not looking to see what your race or your background is. It's saying all people are treated equally. All people are the same under the law. And to me, hearing about my dad's journey in particular as a refugee was really inspiring to me as a kid.
Did they know each other before they came, or did they?
No, they did not. They met each other later. My dad actually traveled back to Syria and met my mom's family there. So they did not know each other when they came here. But my dad's story about coming here was so inspiring, and to hear him talk about how these things that would be difficulties, that would be total roadblocks in so many places around the world, the characteristics of your background that would be total roadblocks here in the US. It doesn't mean that there aren't still impediments in some ways, but in the US, we have built a culture and a constitutional system that is protective of rights, that believes in equality. And so those things can be overcome. And to me, that was very inspiring as a kid. And I did want to preserve that kind of America, that American dream for future generations. So that's, I think, really what inspired me to get into politics ultimately.
And did you see politics as being about that when you first got in? And what did you discover once you did?
Oh, yeah, I definitely did. I mean, like I got into politics and thought politics would be about preserving the American dream, preserving liberty, preserving equality before the law. Those are all things that I care deeply about, and the things that I think actually do make America great. Well, when I got to Lansing, I found, I was in the state house first. And I found that, that wasn't really the focus of most people. I think a lot of people in politics are unfortunately focused on very transactional things. Some business wants X, and how can they deliver X to that business? It was sort of very small picture rather than big picture items. And that was certainly frustrating, and it's been even more frustrating at the congressional level, having served in Congress, because I think it's even more dysfunctional there than it is in state government. And you could probably talk a little bit about your experience in state government, but yeah, I found state government to be more functional than the federal government. And really at the federal level, it's devolved now into sort of like an entertainment business more than anything else. It's not so much about protecting liberty. All of that stuff is essentially situational. If you feel like using the term liberty or freedom for your purpose to get your case across, or the Constitution, you use it in that situation. But other people, when the subject matter is different, all of a sudden the Constitution doesn't matter to them. The liberty doesn't matter. It's very situational, and I think that's really disheartening.
One of the things I had to learn, like you, I spent I started my career in the private sector, and in fact, I've spent more of my working life in the private sector than in the public. And one of the things I had to learn in public life was that jobs like the ones you had, or the one I had, were a blend of substance and performance art. And I resented the performance art part of it for the longest time, because it just seemed like it was attention getting. And I figured out over time how to get that in balance. But from the outside looking in today in Washington, not everybody, but a lot of the emphasis does seem to be on performance art, and almost none on substance. And what interests me about what you said about your own journey your own attraction to politics and public life is, and I've had this discussion with other friends who are Republican, let alone Democrat, is that I would articulate my own reasons the same way you did. Because the notion of being able to grow up where I did, much of that time on welfare, and to have had the range of opportunities I have had, has everything to do with the American dream. And it has to do both with, personal determination and grit and imagination and creativity and luck and blessings. But it also had to do with, a great teacher in that public school I went to, and, and food stamps when we didn't have enough to eat, and, a functioning L or subway, that could get me to a job when I was ready to go to work, and an expanding opportunity that made a place for me when I was ready to go to work. So this notion that government has a role to play, not in solving everybody's problems for them, but in helping people help themselves, is part of how I have come to understand how the American dream becomes real. And so I think when it was time for me to declare myself, or I guess sort of when I really began to understand a party affiliation, it felt to me like being a Democrat was the right place for me to be. It's not that I think any one party or any one person has a corner on all the best ideas, but that felt right to me. And I'm interested in how someone else who thinks about the defining quality of the American dream, that aspirational quality of our country, of our national narrative. How is it that how did you come to choose the Republican Party? I know you're not in the party anymore, and I'll bet you more people ask you why you left than would ask you whether you're asked that more by Democrats or Republicans, but we can come to that another time. But how is it that you thought, I'm about the American dream too, and continuing it and making a way for others just like my mom and dad? What made you say that means I want to go be a Republican rather than come to our team?
Yeah. So,
and by the way, we're still accepting applications, so there's room. Come on in.
Well, I'm in the Libertarian Party now, and I'm happy to be there. And I think we can grow that party to become a significant place of a significant home for people throughout the country who feel like they're left out. I've always been a libertarian since I was a kid. I didn't always think of myself that way. I mean, I don't think I used the term libertarian when I was young, but I know now that my mindset was very much like that. I've always had a concern about arbitrary power. I've always had this recognition that we need to have freedom in how we think. We need to allow people to be free in terms of how they think and act, even if we don't agree necessarily with the things they're doing. That those are important values for society as a whole and help us flourish. And I've always had a concern about top-down control, this idea of someone at the top telling you what you can or can't do based on the imperfect knowledge that they have, based on a lot of assumptions about how society works or how individuals interact. And so for me, while neither party was what I would call ideal, the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, I did feel like the Republican Party had an opportunity, at least when I was first entering politics, to be a place that could be welcoming to those kinds of ideas, that had expressed some concerns about strongly centralized government. And for someone who, again, comes from an immigrant family where I've seen the horrors of centralized government, whether it's Assad's regime or the kinds of things that have happened to Palestinians over the years. I, as an American, was, strongly concerned about those things and wanted to make sure that we don't have the same fate in this country. And so, I signed up with the party that I thought would stand up to arbitrary power. And ultimately, that ended up not being true at all. I mean, the Republican Party has given in to arbitrary power
at the national level.
At the national level, as soon as Donald Trump replaced Barack Obama, they changed their tune about so many things. So I don't know that I would say I regret it, but I did learn a lot. I did learn a lot in the process. They didn't really believe what I thought they believed. They said, oh, President Obama is, this and that. They called him a dictator and he's controlling everything. And then as soon as Donald Trump became president, they're like, well, that's all fine. He can use emergency powers however he wants. And if he signs a bunch of executive orders, that's cool. We're fine with that. And that was really disheartening to me. I could see it going in that direction even before he became president. I could see the party was moving in that direction, almost like they were preparing the way. They were like, well, we might win the White House, so let's just start to, pave the way to not caring so much about arbitrary power or centralized power. And I'm afraid now when you look at the Republican Party, which has become increasingly dominated by what some people call national conservatives or nationalists, some people might just call it the Trump coalition. You increasingly see a party that is focused on using government power for its ends, the ends that it wants, and disregarding the means. And to me, the means are so important. Whether you have good means, you could have the best means in the world, or the best ends in the world, excuse me. But if you use the wrong means, you will ultimately destroy liberty and do a lot of damage. I don't think we can afford to live in a country where each side says, well, we have power now, so we will use that power to achieve our ends, and we will disregard the other people who don't care about, who aren't as interested in our ends or have a different idea about ends. But I'm afraid that's the direction we're going in. But look, that's the, I guess I don't know if it's the short story or the long story, but the Republican Party has taken a really bad turn. I think the Democratic Party has significant problems as well in this respect. And so while I initially thought working within the Republican Party was a sensible thing, I now realize it's important to start something new. And that's why I'm with the Libertarian Party.
We got a question in the chat about asking us to talk about personally how we think about freedom. Do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So for me, freedom, and I want to paraphrase F.A. Hayek, who's, for those who were in my seminars, they know that's a person, an economist, a philosopher, a thinker, someone I very much admire. And to paraphrase F.A. Hayek, I would say that freedom is the state in which a person is not subject to coercion by the arbitrary will of another person. Now, it's never something that's achieved in totality in society. You're never going to have a perfect system of freedom. But ultimately, when you talk about it as an aspirational concept, it's that you are not subject to coercion by the arbitrary will of another. And we have an entire constitutional system that has been developed that is designed, not perfectly, but it is well designed to protect freedom. And I think we ignore our constitutional system to our own peril. I think that when we decide that the ends justify the means, as I talked about earlier, I think we are putting freedom at risk. And And so that's, I guess, the short of how I would describe freedom. And how about you? How would you describe it?
I'd go back to where I started in some respects by talking about this notion that you have the chance to reach your full potential. And I agree with you that the Constitution, though flawed, has a pretty brilliant set of guardrails that enable the people to create conditions for people to reach their full potential. I think we have some evidence of that, not just in legislation, but in lives. You know, your mom and dad's, for example, my own. And I think that the necessary elements of freedom are, as I said earlier, equality, opportunity, and fair play. And I think there have to be rules and standards and expectations around that, not all in law, right? Some of it is at home and in neighborhoods, but that are about driving that kind of freedom for everyone. I think we are losing consensus around those elements, as I say, essential elements of freedom. I think we're losing sight of the American dream, as you and I have been talking about it, as a worthy destination. And what worries me, honestly, Justin, I'm not free if I have to fear for my housing when I try to rent an apartment or get a mortgage, or fear for my future when I try to get a job, or fear for my life when I'm stopped by the police. And that does not feel free to me. And while I have, through dint of hard work and opportunity and luck, been able to insulate myself from some of that, I'm not insulated from all of it. And frankly, if I'm not, and even if I were, and lots of others weren't, that would still concern me, and should concern me, in my view, because I do think we have some responsibility to assure that freedom is meaningful for everybody and not just for, ourselves and our own little circle. Mm-hmm. So I worry about that a lot today. And I sometimes I feel like the performance art I was talking about earlier, it overtakes any substantive conversation around that the transactional notion or nature of legislatures and government is what it is, because we've forgotten that everybody's there in order to drive to these outcomes. And I respect what you said about feeling that the party, and this comes from a Democrat who doesn't think you have to hate Republicans to be a good Democrat. It does feel to me like the idea is about sort of capturing the other team's flag almost, and not about actually doing something for the greater good. Like it's all corny now. Yeah. To talk about ideals, and
it's become like sports teams now. I don't think it's almost like the principles are out the window.
Right.
Right. Just, are you on team red or team blue?
Right. And if you state which team you are on, we will fill in all the blanks. Yeah. Right. We will project on you everything we think you think, mm-hmm. Or are about, and spend absolutely no time engaging, no time listening, no time trying to understand what in your set of ideas about this or that solution might actually serve the outcome even better. It's enormously frustrating, and I don't know how we get back. I hope you do. You've got more time to think about it than I do.
We're working on it, and you can be an asset to that as well, to try to improve the system and bring back that freedom and opportunity that you talked about. We have a question from a student I see here. And the question is, I'd love to learn more about what freedom means to each of you from a personal bodily autonomy perspective. Do you want to take that one first? I can
try. Yeah, I was trying to talk about that just now. I mean, I feel like I don't think it's funny. The question is affirmative, but I'll start with the negative. I don't think that freedom is fundamentally selfish, which is to say, I never quite understood the argument around masks, for example, as being about an intrusion on personal choice when the risk to others, at least at a point, was so considerable. It seems to me there is some responsibility each of us has in community for others in the community, and that is a part of how we should think about freedom. When I graduated from law school, one of the things that the president would say to graduating classes, I don't know whether they still do, when the law school graduates were asked to stand and the degree was conferred, was about how we were now prepared to protect, quote, those wise restraints that make us free. And this notion that freedom is not just kind of doing what you want to do whenever you want to do it, but that there are rules to live by, and we all have to live by them. And there shouldn't be rules right down to whether you turn left or right at any, at any walk in the woods. But there are certain boundaries that make it possible for equality, opportunity, and fair play to thrive. And it feels to me like a lot of that is in question right now. Maybe I'll stop there.
Yeah, well, I think, again, this goes to where scale matters. There's when we talk about things like mask rules, the question is not whether some people think masks are good or bad. For example, I wore masks throughout the pandemic. I didn't go into any public places without a mask. You can see pictures of me in Congress wearing a mask. So that wasn't an issue. The issue is, where are the rules being made and where do they make sense to be made? And for me, it's a scale issue. A lot of times rules are being made at higher levels of government than I think is appropriate. I think it would be more appropriate for communities to have more say on how they operate, or a business to have more say about how it operates to keep people safe as they enter. I think it's often the case that people try to make it into, are you pro-mask or anti-mask, or are you pro-vaccine or anti-vaccine? And the issue is much bigger than that. It's about, where is the appropriate level of government to be enforcing this, and how much of this should be left to voluntary interactions, and how many rules of society should be left to essentially voluntary sorts of rules, where people understand each other and act appropriately based on just the knowledge of the circumstances. For example, when you go into a store and you wait in the checkout line, there's probably not even rules on the wall in the store saying you should wait in line. There's certainly no law about it, but people do it because they know that's the appropriate thing to do. There are lots of things like that. And I just believe that a lot of things like masking and vaccination will happen on their own without the government coming in and telling people exactly what to do. I don't know if this is the question, Laura was trying to get at when she talks about bodily autonomy, but a lot of times people are talking about abortion in that case. And I'll say I'm pro-life, but this is a complicated question because from a libertarian perspective, the view will depend on whether you think the unborn child is an independent life deserving of protection or whether it is not. And if you believe it is an independent life deserving of protection, then you also believe the government should act according to the principles we all believe in to protect a life, because that's the really the purpose of government is to protect our rights. And if you believe that it's a life with rights, then you protect it. And there are others who say, well, I don't think that's a life at that stage. I think that is something different than life. And then you'd see the shift toward the mother to say, well, then the mother's rights are the priority here. So I think this is a very complicated question. It's a philosophical question in many ways about when you believe life begins. And therefore you can have a libertarian view on either side of this issue. I think it's really unfortunate that the two major parties, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, have decided to take very absolutist perspectives on this, where it's.
Ooh, I have to disagree with you.
I don't know too many. There aren't too many pro-life Democrats anymore, and there aren't too many pro-choice Republicans anymore. So there is really a move in the direction of absolutism, where you fall in line on the party line on that issue, or you're not going to be in the party. I think it's very difficult to win a Republican primary anywhere in the country as a pro-choice candidate. It's very difficult to win a Democratic primary as a pro-life candidate. I'm fairly confident with that.
I think I'd come at your point on abortion a little differently. Most of the Democrats I know are pro-choice, which is not the same thing as pro-abortion. I come to it from the view that I've never known anyone who's had an abortion who hasn't struggled with the question, really deeply struggled with it on a personal level, on a level of values with her family and friends, and most of all with her conscience. And because I just don't think there are certain decisions that government ever makes well, intimate, personal, conscience sorts of decisions that government, I think, rarely makes well, to my view, leave that to individuals, again, within boundaries, which is what I think Roe versus Wade was trying to do. And to that, I think your point about, whether you consider at every stage a pregnancy as life certainly comes into play. And I think you're right. You could probably have a sort of a libertarian argument on either side of that question in just the ways you say. But it's interesting. You and I can talk about this at this tone of voice. And I don't come away thinking that you're having decided, if I may imply this, that life begins at conception makes you evil on all points, or that we can't engage on other points, or even on this one.
Yep.
There is a notion of there's a way of political discourse which makes that really, really hard to do. Even privately, I must say, there was always the cranky uncle at Thanksgiving, right? You just thought, oh, please, anything but politics. But now it's harder, even in spaces where it used to be okay just to have a difference of opinion. And I feel like we are constantly today being asked to make false choices, and this I think bears on a way I think about freedom too. I mean, today it feels like you can't be a good Democrat unless you hate Republicans. You can't be a social justice warrior unless you hate business. You can't believe Black Lives Matter without hating the police. You understand what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. We have trivialized so much of what we have to engage on in order to be free that I feel like freedom itself is in jeopardy, or is further jeopardized.
Yeah. And I think it's that people are ascribing motives to others that aren't necessarily there. We're looking at each other and saying, well, that person has a different perspective than me, so that person must be evil or bad in some, incredibly horrible way. And the reality is, and this is something, that as I've gotten older, I've emphasized more and thought about more. The reality is we all come from different places. We have different experiences in our life. And if you come from a certain environment and have certain experiences, you will view the world in certain ways. And it doesn't mean that you are a bad person for doing so. I can still think you're wrong. I can still think, well, I think his perspective is biased for this reason or the other, and that there's something wrong about the thinking, or there's some like faulty logic. But to ascribe ill motives to a person for having those views, I think is a terrible thing for us to do, because then we can't have real conversations with people. And too often now I see in Congress people ascribing ill motives to people who have different perspectives. And you see this in national politics, not just Congress, but on TV and on social media. And I think we can have very different views on things. And those who are in the seminar know I invited AOC to be a guest in one of my seminars. And we have very different views on a whole host of things.
But you guys are friends, right?
But we're friends.
Yeah.
And we're friends, and you know, I can respect her for her principles and can understand where she's coming from, and I think she respects me for my principles. And we don't have to hate each other because we have different sets of principles, because we have different experiences. She will never experience life the way I experienced it, and I will never experience life the way she experienced it, and nor will we experience life the same way. You know, there are differences in how we're going to perceive things. And that doesn't mean that we don't try to learn from each other. We are going to try to learn from each other. And maybe one of us will be totally wrong. You know, I could be wrong. You could be wrong. She could be wrong. But the fact is we can't detach our views from our own experiences and say, well, that person must hold those views because that person is bad. You know, that's not the right way to think, but that's frequently how we're thinking. And I think this is a real threat to liberty. You know, we're here talking about freedom. To me, the number one threat to freedom that we have in this country is getting to the point where we have contempt for each other, where people can't have honest conversations with each other, where we become so much on team red or team blue, or, you know, our guys are good and your guys are bad, or vice versa. We get to that point where there's just constant friction and constant anxiety and constant fear. And in an environment like that, people don't seek out more freedom. They actually close in. They actually close ranks. They then say, well, we'll get our strong man to do our bidding, and then the other side will get their strong man or woman to do their bidding. And then it just becomes a clash. And this is what I've seen in so many societies. This is what I'm afraid of, especially given my parents' experience coming from the Middle East, seeing, you know, the dictatorships and seeing the way they pit people against each other, you know, Shia versus Sunni versus Christians, you know, everyone is pitted, and versus Jews, and many times as well. Everyone is pitted against each other in a way that is very dangerous and not conducive to liberty. And in this country, I want to see us all live together as, you know, brothers and sisters who care about each other, and we'll have differences, but we can learn from each other and we can talk to each other.
Well, if the highest purpose of government at whatever level is promoting freedom, are we equally free today? And if we aren't, how is it we surmount the limitations of our own life experiences that lead to whatever conclusion we have? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Are you asking if humans are equally free in the United States?
Yeah.
I don't think they are, because we still have a system that has biases. We still, you know, you talked about the problems of criminal justice, with the way many Black Americans feel about the justice system. I think that there there is still a systemic problem in our system. It doesn't only affect Black Americans, but it certainly does affect them in a serious way. It affects other people too. Sometimes people, just because they're low income, for example, could be affected by this kind of systemic injustice. So I think that there are still those injustices that hinder our ability to be equally free. And to me, an essential element of freedom is this adherence to the rule of law. And the rule of law, one of the central elements of the rule of law is equality before the law. The idea that we are all equal before the law. And I don't think we're there yet. But with respect to how are we doing in terms of freedom versus, say, 20 years ago or 50 years ago, I think we're making advances despite things that I'm concerned about, like increased centralization in the federal government and the growing amount of spending and debt. Those are things I'm concerned about that I think can have very adverse long-term effects. But at the same time, I think we are a freer people as a whole today versus 50 years ago. It wasn't that long ago when gay Americans could not marry. It wasn't that long ago when Black Americans were overtly treated as second-class citizens, told to, and I don't have to explain it to you. So, this it wasn't that long ago. So things are improving. I think we are freer today.
This is the hardest part of civil rights conversation in this country, in my view. And that is acknowledging and holding in equipoise two truths, which is that we are a different country today than we were in the 1950s when I was born, for everybody, including for Black people. And at the same time, that we have miles to go before we are all equal and all free. Both things are true at the same time. And I welcome and encourage the impatience of people around closing the gap between our reality and our ideals. I think that's absolutely critical. I think indifference to that is not just hurtful, but it's counterproductive and self-defeating of the very values that inspired your dad and mom to look, and others like them, to look to the United States. But it is also true, we have to acknowledge we're not the same. We're not the same. But it's, I feel, I guess, that we are, sometimes in our governments, we're kind of losing our energy around closing that gap, right? That that the public even is encouraged to look away, that we are, we get lots of, I guess we get invited to look past the inequalities, to look past the unfairness, and to accept it as the way it is, or just that it's not as important as the next flashy issue or ideal. And yet, I feel like when we are actively trying to close the distance between our reality and our ideals, not only does it make us stronger at home, it makes us stronger abroad.
I think there's just a fear of this fear of reflection, that people don't like to be told that maybe there's still some discrimination in the society that they really care about. That, look, people love America. I certainly love America. I think it's the greatest country on earth. It's why I got involved in politics, because my dad and my mom showed me what a blessing we have to have been born in this country. What a wonderful place where there is opportunity and the ideals of equality before the law. And I think when we look at a country like the United States and we feel so proud of it, of what it's been able to achieve in terms of prosperity and equality, there are a lot of Americans who say, I don't want to knock it. I don't want to say something negative about it because that reflects badly on my neighbors and my friends and me. And I don't want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But look, growth is about self-reflection. It's about recognizing where you were wrong, what mistakes you made. I try to do this every day. Think about like, what did I screw up so I can be a better person and move forward. And, we've made strides. We're better as a country today in many respects than when we started this country. The level of discrimination that was overt when this country began is frankly incredible to us today to look back on it. There was slavery. People were enslaved. To me, I mean, you can't have something further from freedom than that, enslaving people. And today, we've made great strides, but we have a long ways to go.
Yep.
And that's okay. It's okay to admit that we're not perfect, that we make mistakes. And I think a lot of people are just reluctant to do that.
So I want to build on that, Justin, if I may, because I sense that too. It's a little like parents and their kids. You can criticize your kid, but don't let the teacher or anybody else do so. But we are. I agree with you. This is a remarkable. It's a remarkable country, and it's remarkable because, in my view, we're the only nation in human history organized around these civic ideals, the ones we've been talking about. It wasn't geography or religion or even a common culture, frankly, that formed this country. It was these aspirational notions, which is why I think and why I have experienced when we are moving actively, consciously, deliberately toward closing the gap, we are stronger at home and abroad. So the experience I think I first had really thinking hard about that the first time I lived overseas, first time I'd ever been overseas after college. And I remember sitting in this remote village in Sudan, and somebody who spoke just a little bit of English, and this is in the 1970s, asked me, there was a civil rights movement in the 1960s. What happened to it? And imagine trying to answer that question in Arabic. Mine wasn't very good at that time. But the curiosity in that, the interest in that, and the inspiration from that is a form of our power and our footprint around the world, I believe. I think the mistake that we sometimes make, and that I worry about right now, and I know we're out of time, is that we are losing a sense that there are practical things that make the closing of that gap real. And so when I talked about, my own journey being made possible, yes, by issues of inequalities around self-discipline and personal responsibility and a family and other adults who paid attention to me and taught me how to look up rather than down, it was also true that there was a good public school with a well-prepared teacher in front of us who loved us. It was also true that there was a place where we could go at what was then Osteopathic Hospital on the South Side to get a checkup. It was also true that we had food stamps. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's not that anybody was looking for permanent solutions to the calamities in our lives or in our neighborhood, but we did want to feel like a path was possible that helped us surmount the things that were beyond our control. And so the notion, I'm coming back to where we started in some respects around the American dream. I think we have got to understand that the American dream is sustained by a combination of the American spirit and public and private sector, frankly, decisions that we make together that make that dream possible for everybody. When it's possible for everybody, we'll be free.
Yeah, I think we're at the end of our time right now. So I just want to say to all the students who are on here, who are listening, please, keep an open mind. I think that's really important. It's something I say to students all the time. You are the future. You can make a difference in this country. When you look at Congress and the way it works or doesn't work, the way people have become so polarized, that is really a barrier to liberty. That's going to cause us to take steps backwards as a country, and I don't want to see that happen. You know, we're making progress over the many decades, and we have a long ways to go still. And you can make that difference by keeping an open mind and having honest communication with each other. So I just want to, Deval, thank you for this conversation. I want to thank the University of Chicago, and go ahead, David, if you have, or Deval.
I just wanted to say that I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time, and we have to have more of them. We have these very deep and significant challenges today, and a lot of them have to do with the inability to sit down and honestly talk through these issues and talk through our differences and find out what our common conceptions are. And the reason that we invited you to sort of inaugurate these kind of conversations here at the IOP is because you do that, and you are open, and you are willing to be introspective or to be self-reflective and to learn from others. And to me, that's an essential element of leadership. So I just want to tell you, you're both enormous assets to the IOP, and but more importantly to the country. And I really appreciate you, and I appreciate you taking the time today.
Thanks, you, David. Justin, I look forward to getting to know you better.
Yeah, I look forward to that too, and happy to have more conversations in the future. I think this is really an important topic, and I'm glad you thought of it, like to have this event.
Keep it going.
Yeah.
Keep it going.
Thanks, everybody.